In 1859, a sick, broke, unemployed railroad conductor with no engineering training drilled a hole 69.5 feet into the ground in rural Pennsylvania. He wasn't the first person to think of the idea. He was just the only one stubborn enough to actually do it. His name was Edwin Drake, and that hole changed the world. To understand why Drake matters, you have to understand what the world ran on before he came along. Light, the ability to see after dark, was expensive. Homes burned whale oil and camphene. A single lamp could cost a working family an entire day's wages to fuel for one evening. By the 1850s, American whaling fleets were hunting whale populations toward collapse. Over 700 ships at sea. The supply was shrinking. The price was rising. People knew there was another option. Rock oil, petroleum, seeped from creek beds in western Pennsylvania. But no one had figured out how to get enough of it. Edwin Drake was, in almost every sense, the wrong man for the job. Born in 1819 on a New York farm, he had worked as a hotel clerk and a railroad conductor. By 1857, he was 38 years old, chronically ill, and out of work, surviving on a small pension in a New Haven hotel. A company called Seneca Oil had purchased land in Titusville, Pennsylvania, a frontier town of just 243 people, where oil seeped from the ground. They needed someone to go investigate. Drake got the job because he happened to be staying at the same hotel as the company president, and he had a free railroad pass. That was the entire qualification. The president addressed Drake's mail as Colonel Drake, a completely invented title, so the locals would take him seriously. Drake had never held military rank. He leaned into it for the rest of his life. When he arrived in Titusville, locals called his plan to drill for oil laughably absurd. They weren't wrong to be skeptical. It had never been done. Drake's insight was simple, and it came from watching the salt industry. Salt drillers had been boring deep into Pennsylvania bedrock for decades to reach underground brine. Drake's realization, if oil seeps to the surface, there must be a reservoir underground, just like salt brine. Drive a pipe down to bedrock, then drill through it. Every expert he consulted said it couldn't work. He hired a blacksmith named William Smith, Uncle Billy, and started drilling in the spring of 1858. The hole kept collapsing at 16 feet. Water flooded in. Investors cut off funding after spending $2,500. Drake took out a personal $500 loan to keep going. When the borehole collapsed again, Drake devised a solution. He drove cast iron pipe joints through the loose upper soil first, as a sleeve, then ran the drill rod through the center. The sleeve held the walls. The drill could reach the rock. Every oil well drilled in the world today uses a version of this method. Drake never patented it. Saturday evening, August 27, 1859. Drake had gone home for the day. Uncle Billy and his sons were working the pump alone. At 69.5 feet, the drill bit dropped into a crevice in the bedrock. They stopped for the night. Sunday morning, Billy peered down into the pipe casing and saw dark liquid rising toward him. He sent for Drake. They brought crude oil to the surface with a hand pitcher pump, collecting it in a bathtub. The well produced 25 barrels of oil per day. The news spread with astonishing speed. Within a single day, Drake's methods were being imitated by others along Oil Creek. The abandonment letter from his investors arrived, and was ignored. The oil rush had begun. What followed was one of the most explosive economic booms in American history. Titusville's population of 243 people began growing rapidly, reaching nearly 9,000 by 1870. The town of Pithole Creek appeared from nothing. 15,000 people, hotels, newspapers, a telegraph office, and collapsed just as fast when its wells ran dry. Pennsylvania's oil output grew from roughly 2,000 barrels in 1859 to around 500,000 barrels by 1865. The price of crude oil collapsed from $16 a barrel to just 49 cents by 1861, killed by the very boom Drake had started. Western Pennsylvania would supply half the world's oil until the East Texas boom of 1901. A young Cleveland merchant named John D. Rockefeller visited the oil fields in the early 1860s and saw not chaos, but opportunity. He began quietly buying refineries. He was paying very close attention. Before 1859, only the wealthy could afford to read after dark. Kerosene put light within reach of every family in America. But kerosene was just the beginning. Petroleum produced lubricants that replaced expensive animal fats in factory machinery. Paraffin replaced beeswax in candles. Petroleum jelly, what we now call Vaseline, arrived by the early 1870s. A single barrel of crude yielded dozens of useful products. Drake's drill also did more for whale conservation than any law ever passed. American whaling declined sharply through the 1860s and 1880s as kerosene captured the lamp fuel market. The 700-ship whaling fleet began a collapse it would never recover from. Meanwhile, Rockefeller had seen the future with unusual clarity. He understood that whoever controlled refining, not drilling, would control the entire industry. In 1870, he founded Standard Oil of Ohio. Within a decade, it controlled 91% of all oil refining in the United States. While thousands of men grew rich from his discovery, Edwin Drake got nothing. He had no patent. He owned no oil land. The investors kept the profits. Drake had simply been the hired man who made it all possible. In 1863, he moved to New York and tried speculating in oil stocks. He lost everything. His health was failing. Severe neuralgia left him barely able to walk. By the late 1860s, he was destitute. The man who started the oil boom was surviving on charity, while the fields he discovered produced millions of barrels annually for other men's fortunes. The citizens of Titusville started a collection for him in 1870. 3 years later, they convinced the Pennsylvania legislature to act. In 1872, Pennsylvania voted Drake an annuity of $1,500 a year. The crazy man, as they'd once called him, was finally acknowledged. He died on November 8, 1880, in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. In 1902, a Standard Oil executive paid to build a monument at his grave. The chain reaction Drake started is almost impossible to overstate. Standard Oil, built on crude oil that Drake proved could be drilled, became the most powerful corporation in American history, until the Supreme Court broke it into 34 companies in 1911. Those companies became Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and BP America. Then came Edison's light bulb in 1879, and petroleum found new markets in lubricants faster than kerosene demand faded. In 1885, Carl Benz patented the first gasoline-powered automobile. Gasoline, previously a waste product that refiners struggled to get rid of, suddenly became the world's most valuable commodity. More than 4 million oil wells have since been drilled in the United States alone, every single one using Drake's drive pipe method. Drake is remembered for the well, but what he actually gave the world was more than a hole in the ground. He gave the world the drive pipe, still the universal method of preventing borehole collapse. He gave the world the petroleum industry model: drill, barrel, refine, sell. And most importantly, he gave the world proof of concept, the revolutionary idea that oil existed in vast underground reservoirs that could be systematically tapped at scale. He filed no patent. He claimed no royalties. His methods spread freely. The industry grew. He watched from poverty. 3 lessons from Edwin Drake's story. First, the breakthrough often comes from the wrong person. Drake had no training, no credentials, no qualifications. He got the job because of a hotel coincidence and a free railroad pass. Sometimes being unencumbered by knowing what's impossible is the greatest advantage a person can have. Second, the inventor rarely captures the value. Drake created a multi-trillion-dollar industry and died on a $1,500 state pension. Rockefeller, who arrived after Drake proved it could be done, became the richest man in history. In innovation, timing, and ownership matter as much as the original idea. Third, one small action can have consequences that are impossible to predict. A 69.5-foot hole in a Pennsylvania creek bed produced kerosene lamps, Standard Oil, the gasoline engine, plastics, synthetic fiber, and the modern military-industrial complex. The hole was small. The consequences were not. Edwin Drake drilled a 69.5-foot well for roughly $2,500. From that single act came a $5 trillion a year global industry. From a sick man with a free railroad pass came the energy system that powers the modern world. He got none of it. He gave all of it. Every time you fill a gas tank, heat a home, board a plane, or touch a plastic object, you are living in the world that Edwin Drake made possible on a Sunday morning in August 1859, when a blacksmith peered down a pipe and saw oil rising toward him. Next episode, John D. Rockefeller, the man who took what Drake started and turned it into the greatest corporate empire in American history. A story about vision, ruthlessness, and the invention of modern capitalism itself.